Welcome to today's session of the Rancher Office Hours. Being done this week is just the Rancher TV podcast. I am your host. My name is Adrian Goins, as you just saw float down below there. And, well, I'm the Director of Community and Evangelism here at Rancher Labs. We are here today to answer your questions about Rancher's solutions, so come and join us in the Office Hours channel of the Rancher Users Slack. If you don't already have an invitation, you can get one for free at slack.rancher.io. I am joined today by a panel of technical experts. So before we dive in, let's do a round of introductions, and I'll let you guys fight for who gets to talk. Hey, Kyle, looks like you're up first.
Fair enough. My name's Kyle Rome. I'm the Director of Field Engineering for the Americas here at Rancher. I've been with Rancher for about 2.5 years now. So my team handles all of the kind of technical expertise for pre-sales as well as community outreach and evangelism as well.
Who's next?
I guess I'll go next then. Wait for the camera. There we go. Hello, everybody. I'm Jason Skrzypek. I'm also a field engineer. I've got a little bit less seniority. I've only been here for a year, but I've been working in the Kubernetes space. In particular, have an application developer stint for the last 4 or 5 years.
Nice to meet you, Jason. JVB, start talking and it'll steal the screen.
Sure thing. So I'm Jason van Brackel, also known as JVB. I've been working with Rancher as long as Kyle has. We actually started the same day. I'm actually with Rancher Federal now, specifically focused on IT operations, DevOps, DevSecOps with the Platform One project.
Very nice, very nice. This is a public event, and no public event would be complete without some basic ground rules. So, basically, I could read all of this to you, but this is a safe space that exists to help members of the community grow from the experience of others. Everyone is welcome, and we expect all of you to treat one another with respect and dignity, and ultimately what that means for me is that there are no stupid questions. Ask any question that you can think of that might be relevant. And, it can be, well, try to limit your questions to topics around how to use Rancher, how to use Kubernetes, how to use CNCF tooling, and we will do our best to answer every question. But we're also just going to open it up this week to, conversations about stuff. If there are no questions in the chat, we're just going to be talking about technology and things that we've encountered that are interesting, and you're welcome to join into those in the chat in any way possible. We just want to make this more of just a chat session and not really a how do I use Rancher session, but we'll answer those questions too. We don't have access to your specific environment, so that means that we might not be able to do specific debugging of local issues, but we will do our best to help you get to the next step in your troubleshooting. Panelists, my esteemed colleagues, jump in and answer questions whenever you want. Feel free to add more information from your own experience that will help whoever is asking the question. And if you're watching this and you're in the chat, you can help us out by pasting URLs for official documentation, blogs, tweets, or anything else that might be relevant to the conversation. We take live questions and prepared questions, so in between sessions, you can post your questions on the Rancher forums or Stack Overflow, tagged with Rancher, K3S, RKE, or Longhorn. You can tweet stuff to me. You can follow Rancher Labs. There's all sorts of ways that you can find us and ask us questions. And I recognize that we do this on a monthly basis, and it's not really very much fun to ask a question then wait a month to get an answer. So just join the Rancher user Slack. Ask your questions there. There is a community there of tens of thousands of people who are committed to your success. And of course, you can always just reach out to me directly. I am just Adrian. If you're new to Kubernetes or Rancher, we have a weekly intro to Kubernetes and Rancher training. Actually, I take that back. We were doing it weekly, but it's summer and everybody's on holidays. Now it's every other week, but it'll either be every other week or it'll go back to weekly. That training will get you up and running with Kubernetes. And then for comprehensive training on Rancher and using it to deploy and manage Kubernetes clusters, I invite you to check out the Rancher Academy, which is at academy.rancher.com. That's it for my housekeeping. We have no questions in the chat, which means it's just an open session. So let's make it an open session. But remember, join us, ask your questions. Hey, Edgar's just joined the chat. Hello, Edgar's. All right, guys. So I was in the Cert-manager event a few minutes before this started. It's actually still going on. Do not leave this stream to go watch their event. If you're here, stay here, please. But it was really cool. Go back and watch the replay. If you're not familiar with Cert-manager, Cert-manager is the, well, hands down, the best way to get cluster certificate management going. It interfaces directly with Let's Encrypt, with Vault, and it just makes it so easy to deploy certificates. They just rolled version 1 of their API. Personally, I'm excited because I was making Cert-manager videos, and every time I'd make a video, they would change something, and the video was like not relevant within a week. So I get to go back and make all of my videos. Now I'm going to make them for the V1 API. There's just a whole new layer of stability. Do you guys use Cert-manager, and how do you feel about the new promised stability? Do you think they'll stick to it?
I just have to see how much stuff they broke from my previous videos where I've worked with Cert-manager, which is probably everything.
Everything, basically, yeah. Jason,
in general,
Kyle.
I try to recommend it wherever I can. Let's Encrypt is I basically like being able to do that sort of thing for free. I know everybody's got a lot from the enterprise side of things. Everybody's got their own private CAs and stuff like that. But you really need that sort of solution beforehand when you're testing in something open source or something that you're just spinning up live in your own personal environment or something like that.
Free certificates are wonderful. I always cringe when I saw the price that people wanted for wildcard certificates, and it's just, there was no reason for it to be like that. I'm really pleased that Let's Encrypt came along and they were like, you know what, let's just make HTTPS available for everybody. And they've done a fantastic job of making it accessible.
You know, I've thought a bit about the other side of the house there, actually offering certificates as a service within an organization, kind of being like an internal Let's Encrypt. I've looked at the Let's Encrypt open source software. It's a little too heavyweight for that sort of thing, but anybody else seen something like that or played around with that?
You're talking about like certificates as a service inside the org. I mean, what would you use as a back end for that? Would it still be Let's Encrypt?
Essentially being an Acme, provider for your organization.
That's interesting. Why would you choose that over something like Vault?
I could see doing that with something like Vault, just from a, I don't know, specialization type of thing. I see what you mean with Vault. I might look into that too. But I was thinking about that from hey, how would I be Let's Encrypt if I were, say, a DoD project? I'm completely air gapped, and I want to be able to, issue wildcard or even application-specific certifications on the fly. So, you talk about external DNS, for example. What happens if I can annotate a service or an ingress rule that also creates an external DNS rule internally, but also issues certificates on the fly that are fully trusted by the organization?
Right. Fully trusted by the organization is an interesting barrier to cross, as you have to have all of your hosts supporting the CA that you're using. So if you could proxy all of that directly out to a trusted CA, that would be pretty amazing. Otherwise, yeah, the self-signed certificates warning error is always scary to users who don't know what they're looking at.
Oh yeah.
Taylor
and the
just popped
browser
up and he said,
it's scary.
Yes. Taylor just popped up and said, with Cert-manager 1, they have fixed the issues that they had with Let's Encrypt. Oh, he's actually asking a question. Have they fixed the issues they had with Let's Encrypt, where old versions of Cert-manager are being blocked? Let's Encrypt was actually going to appear in the event, but I had to leave before they came on, and I think that was one of the things that they're going to address. So I don't have an answer for that, but hopefully in the Let's Encrypt section of the event, we can go back and watch that.
Do we know if the Cert-manager day is being recorded to be watched later?
It's a live stream on YouTube, so yes, you will be able to just go back to the event. In fact, I will post it in the Rancher user Slack, as long as you promise not to leave our stream and go watch their stream. Actually, if you do, I won't be mad. It is. Oh, I'm not sure which one it is. I think it's this one. Let's see. Let's wait for the Slack preview to maybe. All right, I will go and get the actual one and post it for those of you who want to go back and watch it later. What else has been going on with you guys? We talked before the show. We were like, what are we going to talk about when there's nothing to talk about? Throw out a topic that we can all just rabbit hole into.
Well, the biggest rabbit hole that I've been dealing with lately is and you've talked about this on your morning show a bunch, is the whole registry thing with Docker. I'm trying to get in.
Oh,
I haven't spun it.
yeah.
I haven't spun up. Uber has a P2P registry that I've been
Hmm.
wanting to play around with called Kraken. Um, but the one thing that you mentioned most recently, and I think it was, I don't remember the project, but I think we're getting to the point where the security tools need to have they need to release blog articles that suggest, well, now that all of the registries are going to be just random URLs, what is the bare minimum for trustability,
Hmm.
to know what your images you're pulling down? Because honestly, if I were an enterprise and I was undergoing this, I'd be a little bit concerned right now if I didn't already have those tool sets deployed.
You absolutely should be concerned. Like, fake registries are going to be the next phishing attack. You're going to see, oh yeah, just pull down your trusted banking container from URL that looks kind of like the banking URL, registry, whatever. And people are going to start deploying stuff that's inside their infrastructure. They're just going to like open the door and let the vampires in. I think that's a huge risk.
Let's see if there's a big influx of Bitcoin miners.
Oh.
In the stuff that I go through for the morning show. If you don't know the morning show, I started a 30-minute daily live stream called Coffee and Cloud Native. You can look for that, and I talk about all sorts of random technology and stuff. And in the stuff that I prepare for that, I see things about such and such company found crypto miners on their stuff. Some other company found crypto miners on their stuff. It's a shame that that's like the best possible thing that people can come up with to do is crypto mining. But back to the security question. If there are a few places that I can go with this. One is, do we all agree that Docker's decision to do this? Well, I don't say do we all agree. How do you feel about Docker's decision to do this? Do you think that the decision to change their pricing structure and start expiring unused container images is good for the community or bad for the community?
I understand it. I don't. I feel like that's a tough thing to say is good for the community. I mean, like, it's clearly driven by a business decision, right? Like,
Right.
at the end of the day, Docker is now Docker Hub and Docker for Desktop, really, right? So those things have to support their company. So you have two possible avenues of revenue. You better have them be properly, monetized, I guess. So I think it's just kind of a product of where Docker is as a company right now. If people have an argument for how this is good for the community as a whole, I'm open to hear it, but I certainly don't have an argument for that side of the house.
Yeah, I think we're going to see this
Jason?
I think we'll see this as a forcing function for, Harbor projects like Harbor, private registries, image caching, all of those things. That that image pull always policy isn't gonna happen anymore, and you're going to see creative ways of getting around it. I know some of the developers I'm working with who have bandwidth caps, they're using K3D and caching images locally, so they're only pulling them once for all their local development. That way, they're not running into issues with the bandwidth and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think for the enterprise, this probably isn't a big deal, except for when they're pulling things for like open source projects like Rancher, where they're not necessarily set up on a private registry, but everything that they're doing and developing is already going to be there. So it's more about the system components of how they're building their environment. I think that this is going to impact, and they're just going to probably have more pseudo air gapped setups than we saw previously.
So since we have two Jasons on here, I will stop saying Jason and I will start saying Shipwreck and JVB. So Shipwreck, what are your thoughts?
I think if we survive this, what I'm going to call the registry winter, it'll probably move the standards up a notch, which would never be a bad thing. it's just a matter of whether or not it comes at a great cost. If a whole bunch of the infrastructure is actually being used nefariously for a while, or if we ultimately bring that back in.
Do you guys think something like Notary is going to become more important, or just
Yes.
Docker, like image signing and verification? Which
Blockchain, all the blockchain. There's going to be a blockchain solution for this.
Dude, you know there is. You know there is. Yeah, because if you bring in image signing, well, then you have to trust whoever signed it. So that simply centralizes the authority, and we're back in kind of the TLS world. Or you just trust that an image was signed, in which case, you know, crypto hacker Billy can sign his stuff, and you'll be like, yeah, sure, I'll deploy that too. I think that's the right direction to go, though, and I think that's going to be an interesting challenge for innovative people to solve. My opinion is spread across various parts of the things that you guys already brought up. One, Docker needs to monetize their stuff. Two, Docker gives us a lot of stuff for free, and we don't have any right to expect that they continue to do so. The numbers that I saw were that they have approximately 15 petabytes of container images, and something like 10 of them haven't been accessed in the last 6 months. That's ridiculous. So that's a huge amount of storage that they're paying for that we have no right to expect them to continue to do so. However, anytime you give somebody something for free and then you take it away, they're going to get mad. Attached to that is, if you look at the numbers that Docker are quoting, they're not actually after the monetization of the existing user base. They say in one of their articles that they want to build a solution for the hundreds of thousands or millions or some huge number of developers that aren't even using containers yet. If they bring people in to use the service and those people start out recognizing that the service is a paid service, then they don't have anything to be mad about and they're just going to continue to pay. I suspect that from a business perspective, what they're banking on is that they'll get an influx of new users who will pay, and they don't really care about those of us who've been using it forever because whatever, we'll go find our own solutions. However, this creates an opportunity for the market, and immediately you saw GitHub rolled out their thing. Even though it's in beta, and from what I've been seeing, it doesn't totally work right, everybody's like, well, shoot, my stuff's already on GitHub. Why don't I go ahead and do that? GitLab already has a container registry baked into it. I don't know what its limitations are. Microsoft has deep pockets, and they can run GitHub's registry solution at a loss and take market share. So I think that Docker's plan of monetizing this is going to fail simply because it forces the market to create alternative solutions. That's the business side of things.
Yeah.
On the user side of things, if you are running any type of environment in which you pull container images, just deploy a pull-through cache. You can do that with Sonatype Nexus for free. You can use Docker's own Registry 2 container image, and you can do caching with that. And that's just good for your environment, that you're just, all your stuff is local. We looked at Kraken for when Rancher was going to include Harbor in the product. Kraken was one of the solutions that we were looking at. And Kraken is an interesting solution, but it's really applicable for when you have thousands of nodes that need stuff deployed, and it's like a BitTorrent registry solution. It's pretty cool. So run a caching server, and you'll be protected from a lot of this. Where I have the largest struggle with what Docker did is where they put the responsibility for the limitations on images that you can pull. So take Rancher, for example. Rancher is a company, and Rancher releases all of its stuff for free, and it's open source, and it's hosted out there, and it's great, and you can go download it. If Rancher creates a product that is popular, Rancher wants to give that product away for free, the people who use it are actually penalized. If an organization has a lot of nodes and they want to run a lot of Rancher stuff and they're pulling the Rancher agent down, that organization has to pay Docker to be able to pull more than 100 or 200 images per hour. And I think that from a business perspective, what that does is that's Docker inserting themselves into Rancher's business model and forcing people to pay for something that Rancher wants to give away for free. I think that that's inappropriate. What?
Yeah. Is there another way you think they could have, like, because I think we all agree, right, where Docker is, this is something they had to do. do you think there's a way to monetize it that would have been better handled? Or is it just they're stuck between a rock and a hard place?
What they need to do is innovate. They need to create new features for Docker Hub that they release as paid features, but they keep the way that things are as the status quo. And
so have a community and an enterprise do an open core sort of model.
Something like that, yeah. Like for, you pay, you get image scanning, or you get access to Notary, or you get access to some other level of enterprise functionality that benefits businesses who are willing to pay for services. They kind of circle back and they said, okay, we'll put together an open source plan, but I haven't seen any details of what that is. I think that's in response to the backlash from the community. It's just really hard to give something away for free and then start charging for it later, even if I understand conceptually the reasons for doing so.
Yeah.
And then you get into the whole security side of it.
Yeah, it's just kind of the nature of the beast in a lot of technology companies, especially ones that depend on like number of users and user growth rate, right? So things like ride sharing is a good example, right? Mm-hmm. People don't really care how much it costs the company, or if you're operating at a loss, if your user growth base is growing through the roof. So then when you get to a point and you have to make that switch and you can't be operating at a loss anymore because either things haven't necessarily gone your way, and you're now trying to kind of pivot as a company, like, yeah, it's just an unfortunate. Yeah.
Docker created a beautiful thing, and lots of other companies have made massive amounts of money off of what they released for free. And
you mean you have to make a profit? I mean, come on.
Oh, that's such an antiquated business model. Monetization. Yeah. No, you just get more VC funding. So we had a question pop up in the chat that I saw JVB answered, but I want to just throw it out there anyway for those who are watching that aren't actually in the chat. And if you're watching and you're not in the chat, come join the chat. It's free. Go to slack.rancher.io, get yourself an invitation, come join the Office Hours channel. But David J asked a question about changing what's called the server URL for the Rancher server after installation. And JVB answered that it's possible to change it, but difficult to do so. And that's absolutely correct. When you first install Rancher, let me actually jump to the Slack view here. When you first install Rancher, oh, we lost our pip windows. Let's see, I'll put myself up there. Actually, that's not going to work. Okay, whatever. When you first install Rancher, you're asked to designate the server URL. And that is the URL that downstream clusters will reach back into. There's an agent that's installed and it reaches back into whatever the Rancher server is on that URL to maintain a WebSocket connection and receive all of its information. I've seen people use IP addresses for that, and the problem is that if the IP changes, the downstream cluster has no idea how to reach back. So at the very least, you want to use a name and make a DNS change if the IP changes. And as JVB pointed out, that's also correlated to the certificates that are generated for that name. So you don't want to change the name later because there's a whole bunch of certificate stuff that's just going to break. It's an excellent question. The other question that he had was about RKE adding additional nodes to existing clusters. It sounds like there's some confusion in the documentation about the definition of control plane versus master. In general, Kubernetes refers to master nodes as a combination of the master nodes and etcd, whereas in Rancher terminology, we separate out master nodes into control plane and the etcd nodes into data plane, which you can combine onto single nodes or you can separate them out, and that way you can scale them independent of one another. RKE absolutely can change the number of data plane nodes, control plane nodes, and worker nodes on the fly. And it's amazing. You can launch a single node RKE cluster, and then you can go back and add 2 more nodes to it and make it HA. You can peel off the data plane nodes. You can move the master nodes. You can break it apart into a fully distributed architecture, all on the fly, all from just using RKE up. So also a great question from David J.
Let's talk about documentation.
Okay. Let's do that.
I think documentation definitely needs a little bit more credit and a little bit more forethought. At one point in time, when I was a strict application developer, I was trying to spearhead internal to my organization DDD, documentation driven development, where the documentation has to lead everything, and then ultimately probably get into either BDD or TDD, behavior driven development or test driven development. And when I left, it was, I think, 2 years ago at this point in time, it became a lot easier because of the Open API spec, the Swagger spec, where you just have this giant YAML configuration, and it kind of structured how your APIs would be set up, and you could put the notes effectively in them like you would kind of like any other markdown. But what, like, if you're going to investigate a new open source technology, what is the core nugget of documentation that you need?
Wow,
You're going to
that's an interesting question.
Installation and configuration, I think.
Yeah. I want enough getting started so I can be really dangerous and break stuff, at least to begin with. But yeah, coming from an app dev standpoint, because I was an app dev for a long time before I got into Kubernetes. Documentation is product. It is, one of the most empathetic things you could do for your customer is have good docs. And nothing says you hate your developers more than having crappy SDK docs.
That's a bit harsh. I don't think anybody who has crappy SDK docs hates their developers. But
it's just a joke I used to tell with to the last company that Kyle and I worked at was, we hate developers TM because the SDK docs was just really hard to consume the SDK, and we were dealing with a proprietary product. If developers don't like it, they're instantly going to throw their hands up and be like, I don't want to use this.
Yeah, I'm not going to spend the time to figure it out.
Yeah, it's what I hate about Kubernetes from a developer standpoint is that the operator documentation, the operator user experience is awesome. For a developer who has to consume Kubernetes,
That's a good expression. If only I could find the emoji for that.
I think it's
made all the more worse by Kubernetes, and I guess this is my opinion, shared opinion probably, that with Kubernetes 118, like the user experience for developers is manage fields, manage fields, manage fields, manage fields.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Speaking of that.
I mean, that's for operators too, right? It just makes everything more difficult to sort through. It makes logs more difficult. It makes just simple troubleshooting more difficult when you're trying to look at just YAML and JSON output. There's got to be a better way to manage those managed fields. I just don't quite get why that was thrown in there as it was.
Yeah.
As an operator who's dabbled in development, I find that things that are extremely valuable, like test-driven development. Okay, so in my previous life, I owned a company. It was a managed services provider, and we managed and built data centers for other companies. And you'd have a budget for a project, and then as it got near, or if the client didn't like the budget, they would just start taking things out that were important for us, that made it easier for us to do our jobs, but that they didn't see the value in. And that was a transition of risk. So that moved the risk onto us, that we might have to do more work or put forth more effort in the event of some kind of failure without being appropriately compensated for it. The corollary for that I see from a development perspective is that if the budget's too high, well, then take out the things that are going to take time. The two things that take the most amount of time are writing tests and writing documentation. And so those, I think, are the things that as the project is getting closer to deadline, they're like, well, just throw that out. We'll do it later. Except that it just never gets done later. If it's never actually budgeted for, it just never happens. How would you guys who've done development, how would you explain that to somebody upstream who's not in your shoes and just looks at the dollar attached to the project?
I mean, it's never going to be a straightforward answer. There's never going to be a direct correlation. Well, I guess not ever, but there's not often going to be a way to correlate having documentation with users. It's not like your users are saying, yes, I looked at this line in the documentation. You're getting this amount of page views on this part of the documentation. This correlated with X amount of dollars. So I think you have to have buy-in from the top down. At least that was that's been my experience, is that in order to get anything moved in the code base, you have to have at least the stub in the documentation to say, this is the feature we're adding. This is how you would use it.
To make it an actual condition of the deployment of the file.
Add it to your change control.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
nice.
you could certainly treat documentation as code and enforce that at a static code analysis level, as just to make sure that it happens. But yeah, I think that what Shipwreck said about top down is really important there. And there's a lot as far as testing goes. There's a lot of research that's been done around test-driven development and behavior-driven development and the ROI on that, and how that just the dollar you spend up front is worth 10 or 100 down the road, just because it's I think it's gonna crap out.
Yeah, if tests and documentation are being pushed from a top endpoint as a unnecessary value add, you need to get out of that company, because they see IT and software as just a cost sink.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you continue down that road, then the next thing is going to be getting outsourced software somewhere. And that was my first job out of college, was a developer at a company that just clearly saw it as a cost center, lowest common denominator. It just didn't matter.
It's interesting you say that. So I just recently went and read the goal. Now I've skimmed it here and there, and I actually went through and read it cover to cover and read some of it. Eliyahu Goldrat's work following that. And for those who are not familiar, if you've read the Phoenix Project, the goal was what kind of informed the Phoenix Project. The goal's a book that was written back in the 80s about manufacturing. So theory of constraints and lean manufacturing grew out of that. Lean software development kind of stole from lean manufacturing, but the mind shift that you go from looking at production or making money versus cutting costs is significant, because if the goal is to make money, then all the action should be centered upon ways of making money instead of ways of cutting costs. If you're paying a whole bunch of employees to do a bunch of things, that is fairly static, minus pay raises, things of that nature. But to be able to increase production, increase sales activities, increase dollars coming in from the market, because you've improved the developer experience, so they become your bullhorns. You do things like this where we're talking directly to the community, or doing things where you make the life of the operator and developer easier. That creates opportunity for more dollars to come in, and so the focus away from cost cutting, cost savings towards money making is pretty significant there, regardless of what business you're in.
Excellent answer. We created a thing called complexity pricing that our clients didn't like either. But we would go through and we would do, so the whole thing about my company was we were a fixed price. So we would go in, we would do an assessment of the environment. We knew that we'd have to invest some time and energy up front to fix it and bring it in line with the rest of the environments that we supported, after which we would benefit from the economy of scale of applying a universal response and monitoring and everything and procedures across all of our clients. If a client had an environment that was like running really old operating systems, or they didn't have the ability to do regular updates, or if there were best practices that were missing, then we would charge them more for supporting the environment. But we would also tell them that we would give them a project for fixing those things and rolling them out and putting them into place that would ultimately cost less than if they had to pay us to continue to maintain them. So we were trying to incentivize them to move towards a better way of running their data centers. Some of them appreciated that, and we were ultimately able to get the money from the project, and then a lower monthly maintenance cost, but less actual work for us. But then there were others who didn't, and those were the clients who, much like Kyle just described, those are the clients who ultimately were nickel and diming us until we would go in and we'd fix their environment. And then after a year, things were running great, they'd fire us, and then they'd hire somebody for a third of the cost to support what we built. And then eventually that would break too. So that was a challenge for us, and I think your arguments are very good.
The main reason I brought that up is because I've been working with a lot of Helm charts, customize, and just general ways to get products into Kubernetes. And I still don't like any of the solutions from a user perspective. I mean, I'm not platform for Rancher. I like the question set YAML and the kind of self-driven approach there. But from a terminal specific based approach, it's all kind of a mess for a user. I'm just going to, for instance, I was recently charged with installing a registry. I went through and I installed a Harbor registry, and there's just flags on flags on flags on flags. And so much of it is interdependent that I, as a user developer, the user experience just isn't there. And I'd be curious if anybody in the community has any talking points about maybe frameworks or conceptually things they do on top of Helm or Customize or anything else to get Kubernetes to a good user developer standpoint.
If you have an answer for that, come join the Rancher user Slack and let us know. I have no answer for that. Justin says you need to figure out a retention strategy for images. Let me jump back over to the Slack window here. Justin, tell us more about that. See if I can get my pip windows back up. Hey, there's one. And nope. Can't get the other one up. I'm not sure why. Ah, look at that. Congrats. Yay, I figured out my software. Hi, Kyle.
Hello.
So Justin, tell us, you said you need to figure out a retention strategy for images. Is that in response to what Shipwreck was just talking about, or is this response to something else about registry? Well, he replies, I looked at Harbor when it first came out, and I was not super impressed, and I've never gone back and looked at it. But I know that they've added a bunch more functionality to it. And in fact, they just partnered with ByteDance to start storing AI and ML machine image things in there, which I thought was really cool. I don't even know enough about it to talk about it intelligently, but basically ByteDance figured out that they could make their machine learning. There's a component that they could model after the Docker image spec, the container image spec, and store those in a registry. I don't know where I was going with that. I had a thought. It's gone. We're still waiting for Justin to reply. So let's actually jump over to continue with the Helm question, jumping back to the Docker conversation of... all right, so we were talking about the Docker container registry, and Chris said that the free registry has allowed companies which give away something for free to operate with less cost, and that's too bad that it'll be going away. But he thinks that companies like Rancher will have to create a public registry or use one which will allow Rancher or a different third party to bear the cost of providing that service. Otherwise, the end user experience will suffer, and new users probably won't know Docker is to blame, but will blame Rancher for issues downloading images. That's absolutely true. I did not continue my earlier thought by saying that if you're a company and you have something that you make available to people, you may want to consider just hosting your own registry server, because that's also being a good netizen and taking the load off of Docker and absorbing those costs yourself. But in the beginning of this stream, we talked about, will that open up new types of phishing attacks where everybody's going to have their own container registry, and how will you be able to test those? In an earlier conversation, I proposed something like what JFrog has done with Chart Center, where they saw the exact same problem with Helm repositories, where everybody had their own Helm repository and you didn't know what it was built on or whether you could trust what was in there. And they've consolidated all of that into a central point, and then they've added things like image scanning and stuff using X-Ray and Artifactory. Do you think that there's an opportunity for something similar where you're not necessarily hosting the images, but there's a central location where, I don't know, like a proxy or some kind of a redirect or something where you can say, okay, yes, this is trusted, or no, this is a scam? And do you think that could be something that Docker could build and monetize? Kind of weird, like they start charging for the thing and then they find a way to charge for giving it away for free. I guess not. Moving on.
Yeah, I was just I don't think I have anything meaningful to add there. I don't know what that would look like.
It's almost like we suddenly have a whole bunch of new problems that we didn't have a month ago, simply because Docker changed justifiably their pricing model. And it's like, there's just so many ways to feel about that. Justin says, we are tagging our images with the long Git hash. It makes determining which images to keep around a problem. At this time, we're thinking that once an image makes it to production, we need to keep it around, but otherwise we can it in a few weeks. Okay. That's interesting. If you're tagging images with the Git hash, you can already... So every image that's tagged has an SHA hash that corresponds to the actual image itself, which you can just use that in the manifest in your deployment. So you can actually just pull, instead of pulling, colon latest, or which you should never do, but colon v1.1, you can just pull colon and then that big long SHA hash. So you don't have to also tag it in with that. As far as the question of whether you need to keep something around, I would say no. Beyond, like, look at a release of something. Is there ever a situation where you're running version 5 of something and you need to go deploy version 4? For a container image, I would argue no. For code, possibly. You might need to pull an old release of something or an old tag so that you can see if there's a some new bug that crept in. I'm not a developer. I forget the term for that. Regression? Thank you. Regression. It's good to have developers on the call, so that you can test, if there's some kind of a regression, or so you can follow stuff forward. But if you have the code and the code is tagged and you're building images off of tags, you can just build new images from the code. You don't need to keep those images around. Would you guys agree or disagree?
I think I agree with that. Because, the code's still the same. If you're sending the same code, the same build pipeline, the resulting Docker image should be the same. So yeah, I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah, destroy it and build it again if you need to. I think it's so cheap to run these builds that honestly, in a lot of ways, you can just jump over the requirements to have a registry by just running builds alongside your environment.
Yeah, Justin brings up a good point there, mentioning about the dev team's code. We only build once and then promote up our environments. Yeah, that build once, that's a pretty core tenet in most of the build pipelines you see now, where it's built once and then that test artifact, that artifact that's potentially a production artifact, hops through the build pipeline. It'd just be a matter of starting the build pipeline over again. It probably result in the same hash unless there's something with a dependency or something, with a weird text file that has a time check in it. But yeah, I could see that being an issue. But for the most part, it's a solvable problem. Moving the registry complicates it a little bit.
I would look at this from an operations perspective, as on a cost analysis perspective. So if you have thousands of images or hundreds of images and you're keeping all of them because you might need them someday, after 6 months, look at how many of them you've ever gone and used again and say, what's the actual reason that I'm keeping all of these around and what does it cost to do so? And if you're not using them and there's a cost associated with it, if the objective is just we might need to look at this again or we might need to roll back to it, consider what's the maximum time in which you might do a rollback. Are you going to upgrade and then 6 months later roll back? Probably not. So maybe if you might roll back within a week, keep 7 days. And then after that, expire them. If you really, 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 really want to keep them, then just go build a tower machine with a RAID array and stick it in your office somewhere and put a registry server on it and just push them over there and make it like your own little cold storage, because it doesn't need to be connected out to any service that you're paying for.
I think we're actually going to see a lot of that type of thing being developed, in labs and whatnot, because it's just going to be easier than running up against, whether it's a Docker issue or, KIO couldn't keep their stuff up for like a 2-month period where, if you're a downstream dependency or upstream dependency was, K's registry, you might come on a Monday and not be able to deploy anything or have production go down because KIO is down.
Holy cow, I didn't even think about dependencies in Docker builds. Oh, that's going to get ugly. So much stuff is going to break. So much stuff is going to break. You should just be able to be like, oh yeah, just pull from Ubuntu or pull from whatever, or pull from Apache, and now it's like pull from I don't know where that is. And then you're going to go and you're going to look for it, and there's going to be 600 different, Bob's version of Ubuntu and Dave's version of Ubuntu, and ugly. Thank you, Docker.
Yeah. So and the see, this is, it's all publicly available. So the DSOP program has something called Iron Bank. That's their job. Like their job is to grab the open source implementation, certify it for air-gapped government use. And this code, but that also means that if a customer comes in, they want Tomcat with OpenJDK 8 or Tomcat with OpenJDK 11, those are two separate image classifications that need to be certified. So you're going to see other organizations take that type of approach to pulling from the open source image, making sure that it fits their environment, and then is available for their developers to consume, and is the trusted company version of the image. It's the same problem that's happened for developers when it comes to DLLs and .NET dependencies, things that were solved by like NuGet and OneGet and Chocolatey for software for the Windows side, or RPM for Red Hat people. You're going to have a whole new class of that for developers because of what's going to happen with images and what's going to need to happen for images. Because for build dependency, having it having the trusted image as part of your build system is going to be part of that equation.
If Docker is smart, they'll recognize that they just created a massive opportunity, and they will fill that gap with a paid service. I don't know if they can do that, but let's hope. What would you guys actually pay? I didn't look at what Docker's pricing was because, well, I just didn't. But, so David asked in the chat, it's necessary to have some curated Helm repositories, but with some kind of donation or affordable price for maintenance, some kind of foundation program to people and enterprises funding it. It never even occurred to me that maybe what Docker is charging is just worth paying for. Would you guys pay their rate, or do you think that what they're asking is too much? And if so, what would you pay? Let's go look at what they're charging. Docker Hub, pricing and subscriptions for individuals and teams.
I just think there's too many ways around it for an enterprise company without having to incur this cost. So, and for the individual, like it's not targeted at the individual, and so
$5 a month, $60 a year.
Yeah. But is there limits on
that? Unlimited public and private, 2 parallel builds.
So
no role-based access controls. No data transfer limits. So at a minimum, that's what you're looking at, is $60 a year. I just have a hard time paying $60 a year for something that I was previously able to get for free, and I also possess the resources to go and find an alternative solution. But a lot of people don't.
I mean, from an ROI, if I'm already relying on this as part of my build system, I don't want to have to build something else. It's going to cost me more than $60 a year to go, maintain Harbor or something of that nature. I mean, that's from a just line item standpoint, it's almost zero.
But for an enterprise, you would need, that is like per account, right? This isn't like a...
yeah, for an enterprise, it's... so that would be the team, and so that's $7 per user per month, starting at $25 for 5 users. What? I love this. Here's the rate, but it actually starts at a different rate because you can't do math.
Right, so that's not negligible, right?
It's a new cost, but it's not. I mean, it's less than what you're going to pay your dev teams to have IntelliJ or Visual Studio, whatever they use to actually do their work. It's another $7 per user per month on top of whatever other subscription-based services you have. I mean, it's one of those. I'd have to run the numbers for my organization to see if it were worth it to pay the $7 per user per month. If for the stuff I do on the side, that's a no-brainer. I'm going to spend it every time. If I have 100 developers, it's a whole other thing.
What do I need the team for? Like just builds and
Role-based access control.
okay. But can I just
And
use like
pretty much
a
it.
company like system account to do most of my polls and stuff and then cache them locally?
Probably.
Okay.
That's actually what you just said is another valid point. The even the limitations on the free plan, people are going to implement workarounds. They're going to set up a script that just pulls their image once every 5 months and 29 days, and then it just never gets expired. So ultimately, what Docker is hoping to accomplish is easily circumvented with no way for them to really detect that, and they've just opened themselves up to a cat and mouse game.
Yeah, I think
There's a race to the bottom that's going to develop here. It's going to be a commodity that somebody like a GitHub or a Amazon is just they're going to swallow that market unless Docker finds a compelling way to make it worthwhile.
I
They
think
didn't give us a reason to pay for this. They
problem
didn't
is
make
what
it.
Adrian said before. Yeah.
They just said here, just start paying us. Like, we need you to pay us, which I get, but they needed to make us excited about paying. Like, oh my gosh, we're getting all of these great things that we weren't getting before. We totally would pay for that. And then we wouldn't even be having these conversations. What about the fact that what they've created, the fact that there are a bunch of the dependent images that now might move somewhere else, that we now have to take on the additional effort of going and finding those things? Would they be able to like introduce a redirect service or something like that? That might be nice. Companies might pay for that. I'll pay you $5 a month so that every single image that's ever been built from my base image going back to the beginning of time doesn't just suddenly stop working.
From Ubuntu.
Yeah. I mean, I know that it doesn't need it at runtime, but if you go to rebuild something, like, there's just going to be surprises where like, oh yeah, I'm just going to rebuild that. What? It doesn't work. Man.
There's been a similar thing with the communication app called Marco Polo. Like, it's one of those, almost like a walkie-talkie type of thing where you leave a message. It's asynchronous messaging, unlike FaceTime where it's synchronous. It's a great app, but they pulled something very similar where they to listen to somebody at 2x when somebody's talkative like myself and just speaks forever because I like to hear their own voice. Listening to those could be a chore. Well, they, instead of like doing a value add on top of what they already did, they would just went and said, okay, this is now a pay feature to listen to somebody 2x. And you got to tell your friends, okay, just use less words.
For phone walkie-talkie service, I can recommend Zello. Zello? Have you guys used this? Do you know about this? This is really cool. This is start free trial. Huh. Actually, what's their pricing plan? I didn't even realize they had pricing. This basically turns your phone into like a Nextel, like an old school Nextel phone with like a push to talk thing.
Do millennials know what Nextel is?
No.
Aren't you a millennial?
No, I'm right on. I'm kind of right on that edge.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Gen X. Okay, well, maybe I can't recommend this anymore because now they. Anyway, this is what I use.
Aren't that having to make money?
Yeah, that's what I use to talk to my friends. Regardless, it's cool. Check it out. I've never had to pay for it. I've never been asked to pay for it. Maybe it's just if you're hosting some of the like chat community stuff, you have to pay for it. Regardless, it's pretty cool. But oh my gosh, who would ever run that on an iPad? Because you actually have to press that big button. Oh, that's great. Okay, let's go back to Slack and see if there's anybody talking. Chris says I'm gonna pay. Yeah, so it's less than a headache. Grandpa friendly.
iPad is like a jitterbug of the iPhone family.
I don't know, jitterbug. Is that...
It's a cell phone made for people with bad vision. It's got like 3 buttons on it.
Really? I should get one of those. Cell phones for seniors. Oh wow. Huh. One of my neighbors is he's pretty old. His family owned most of the land around this area back in the day, and now they've like chopped it up and stuff like that. He still owns a big piece of it, and he's old, but still super capable. He's out there with farming. He's got horses and cows, and I see him like moving rocks and stuff. He's like a really strong old farmer dude. But he and his wife have just a really basic flip phone each. Not even a flip phone, just a standalone phone, but it has their phone number written on the back of it. And we had like a 5-day power outage a couple of years ago, and he came over. I barely understand him because he speaks like farm Spanish. But I understood that like they needed their cell phones charged, so I was running a cell phone charging service off of my generator during the power outage. I could see him using something like this.
On the note of random countryside and meeting technology, there's a store owner out near my farm in Freedom, New York, who has a cell phone and kind of is effectively the mayor of the town. He every morning he has a list of people that he has in his contact list. He goes through it one by one and texts everybody good morning, like even if they're just business companions.
That's really sweet.
It's very sweet, but it's not something you could do. Like I know I personally have hundreds of numbers on my phone that are just people that I'm tangentially connected to. I would have to start filtering that out some.
It just create a SMS script with like a Trello. Go through your Google contacts and just.
Then it becomes a little less sweet.
Yeah. See. Notice how we've gone from wow, that's really sweet to how can we automate that so that we can get the benefit of being sweet without having to do any of the work. We're all a bunch of engineers.
You still got to respond to them. When I was doing the community thing with Rancher Labs, I had whenever somebody new came onto the Slack, they got a hello from me. It was an automated thing that came from my account. But when they responded, we had a conversation. So it might send out after one of the weekly meetups, it might send out like 50 or 60 messages, and I'd have 10 conversations in from that.
Nice. That's cool. All right, we are rolling into the top of the hour. Is there any burning desires that you guys have you want to share?
I had a question. Recently, so I run Windows. Yes, shuns and shivers and stuff like that.
That's it. No, I'm muting you. That's it.
I specifically run it for WSL2, which is the Linux subsystem that you run on Windows. And recently I had a problem with DNS resolution. Every time I'd restart my computer, I would lose all the DNS from my Linux box, which is a problem, especially when I'm pulling images from random places. And so I spent more time than I probably should have trying to see if this is the time that I should make the shift to Kubernetes-based workstations, something like code-ready workspaces, which it was from the Code Envy project a while ago. It's now owned by Red Hat. It's a completely free product. If you wanted to install it, you can. There's a Helm catalog for it, which is basically you just run a controller that generates workstations that have like Golang installed if you want to run Go development. It's effectively just running VS Code in Kubernetes, specific from user to user. I tried that and I played with it a little bit, and I fixed my DNS issues. Long story short, I fixed my DNS issues, and it wasn't enough to get me to shift. But I'm curious, again, if people run just specifically in their machines, or if we've started to move towards like centralized internet accessible workstations.
I would do that with VMs for a while. I've not gone as far as like the VS Code servers. I've thought about it.
Yeah.
But honestly, if I'm doing hardcore code development and refactoring and things of that nature, I want my power tools, and those power tools don't come with VS Code. The IntelliJ has a nice set, Visual Studio Plus ReSharper, or what's the JetBrains has the .NET UI that works cross-platform compatible. I want one of those. VS Code doesn't quite do it yet. I would need a few more power tools there along the refactoring and code shifting and that type of stuff to make it, where I totally go over to that. I think there's promise there, and I think that's a market that's waiting to be tapped.
Yeah, a little bit more context. And the rabbit hole I didn't go down is that I was doing Golang development. I have Golang installed on my Windows machine, and I need to compile. I'm compiling it in the WSL environment, and so there are some issues currently.
Oh, that's a nightmare.
Yeah,
I've tried that. That's not fun.
no. And so I did not go down the path of installing a way to install or finding a way to install Golang in a KVM on my WSL instance. That would have taken much more time, and that would have been way beyond my my skill set.
So I've gone as far as, and this is years ago now, but it'd be, Cygwin with the X stuff, and then KVM, and then forwarding the X Windows stuff into Cygwin to draw the windows in my Windows box. So it was basically creating a kind of a, almost like the virtual machine, but moving the virtual machine's UI onto my machine, and that worked, but it was a pain to set up and a pain to maintain. I think, I've read other people do that in Docker containers. Oh, it's old memory though. Where you can actually take that, essentially forward a headless Docker containers, Cygwin, or X commands into a client downstream in the Windows world via Cygwin or into the Linux box.
Wow. I have a tag in the show notes for the website called Inception. That would definitely fall under there.
Oh, it's jack shaving for sure.
There's a question in the chat right now before we end this from Mies, who is asking about. So it looks like he had a Rancher launch cluster. This is gonna be the last question, and then we're gonna end because I know we're over time now. So he lost the Rancher server, and he had a Rancher launched cluster, and then he recreated the Rancher server and imported the cluster back in. And I was like, oh, that doesn't work. But he's wondering what he could possibly do to get this back under Rancher control. Is there any magic, or is he kind of stuck with... It looks like he's got two problems. One, can he get this back under Rancher control? And two, if not, how can he access it directly to pull manifests and stuff off of it if he needed to migrate that? Because he said it's basically orphaned.
So you need an authorized cluster endpoint as far as I would think with that goes. But as far as magically becoming an under... Unless you got some magic here, Kyle, I think you run into problems with things like API tokens and the cluster definition inside of the CRDs and things of that nature. But
yeah, so if the original Rancher cluster is truly gone and you don't have any etcd snapshots or anything, then bringing it back under management is probably a non-starter. Some of that will be changing a little bit in the future, but let's not go down that road. If you have the kubeconfig file that you would have downloaded from Rancher, by default, the authorized endpoint that JVB is talking about is enabled. So you'll see that the first entry in your kubeconfig is your Rancher server URL, and then you'll have an entry for each of your downstream clusters API servers. So assuming you didn't set up like an FQDN, that'll look like just some IP address :6443 for each of your control plane nodes. So that will allow you to kubectl directly to that cluster, even without Rancher being involved. And then you could do whatever you need to possibly get some information on resources out. Yeah, so unfortunately, if the Rancher server is just gone, the initial one, what you could have done was taken an etcd snapshot and restore the previous cluster and then just repoint your server URL to the new cluster, and then your downstream cluster would just reconnect, because that Rancher server is still going to be aware of that downstream cluster, is still going to have all the information about that cluster ID. But since it's not, I'm kind of shocked that you could have even gotten that imported, because the agents would have been still probably trying to... You might have double deployed agents or something going on. So that sounds like a bit of a mess. Hopefully you have a kubeconfig file. I don't know what else you can do if you don't.
So there's a lot of hopeful in there. Hopefully you have a backup. Hopefully you have a kubeconfig file. We hope that you can get this restored, but without those things,
yeah, there's a new backup.
A learning experience.
Yeah, there's a new backup I know we don't want to talk about the future too much, but there's a new backup capability coming where you can move Rancher a little more easily rather than having to take a snapshot of the entire etcd. You can take a snapshot of like the Rancher CRDs and resources, sort of like a Valero-esque move for Rancher. So in the future, that kind of backup, restore, move around, migrate story is going to be a lot easier. But unfortunately, in 2.4, you need the etcd snapshot to restore.
All right, that is all we have time for today. So if you give me just a moment, I will wrap this up. First of all, thanks to my esteemed panel of experts who joined, Shipwreck, JVB, and Kyle. I really appreciate you guys coming and joining. Without you being here, this would have been much less interesting. I would have had to do like sock puppets or something like that. And thank you to everybody who joined. Shipwreck put a violin in the Slack, like wah, 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 wah. Thank you all who joined in the chat. Thank you all who watched and didn't join in the chat. We even appreciate that. Hopefully this was of interest and you learned some stuff. The Office Hours channel is always open, so feel free to hang out, continue the conversation. We do this every month, and I look forward to seeing you at the next one. Until then, stay safe and keep ranching. Bye, everyone.